Hey everyone, how's it going? Brian here with the final video of our web development series. So the first video was basically HTML, second video focused on CSS, and this final video will focus on JavaScript. Now we'll work a little bit more in the CSS and HTML files as well, but obviously the biggest improvement will be this file here because it's completely empty. Make sure you watch the first two episodes before starting this one because that's how we made this website so far over here. So, to get started, we are going to, just like we told our website, our HTML page, that we want to use our style sheet with this line of code right here, we are going to tell it to use two more things. Not just one, two. One thing being our own JavaScript file right here, and the other thing being that we're using a library called jQuery. I mentioned this in, I believe, the first episode, maybe the second episode. jQuery is the most popular library for JavaScript. Now, if you're not familiar at all with what that means, basically, someone took JavaScript, or a group of someones took JavaScript, and they made a whole bunch of code for it that basically just makes doing things a lot easier. It expands our capabilities, so we need to write less code to get more done. So we're basically just telling our HTML page, hey, all this great work that these people did to help us out, we're going to use that, and then we're going to build on top of it with our own code. Okay? So we're going to link our own code, but before that, we're going to link their code. We're going to link jQuery's code. And the way we do that, I'm going to paste a line right here because I already have it copied to my clipboard. Paste. Is this line right here. Now don't pause the video yet. You don't need to actually write all this down if you don't want to. This exact line of code that I just pasted will be in the description of this video if you're watching this on Indie Programmer. You can also just Google it if you don't trust me to give you an accurate code. You can go into google.com and type in Google jQuery, because as you can see, this library is actually hosted by Google on their API's domain. So go ahead and get this line here, line 4, or just somewhere above the title below the style sheet, and we're going to move on. The next line after that is going to be linking our own style sheet. I'm sorry, our own JavaScript file. Now it's important that we do it in this order, so just make sure you have the jQuery one above it. Here we go, script. SRC standing for source, and in this case, brackets already knows we want this one right here, and the type is text. I should not have completed that. Type is text/JavaScript. Just like up here, it was text/CSS. And if we close that, it'll give us a closing script tag. And that's all we need to be able to write jQuery in our JavaScript file. So let's go ahead and go into our JavaScript file now. And what we're going to do first is, oh my gosh, I should really silence my phone. Let me check that so it doesn't beep again. Cool. We are going to make some variables. Now, if you've done any programming in the past, this should seem pretty familiar. If this is your first programming foray ever, it'll be a little different. That's fine. It's kind of like algebra, pretty much. We're going to make a variable. And what we want a variable for is we actually want a few of them. We want one for everything on our page that's going to change. That's what makes it variable. It can vary in its value. So for instance, this first number here, it's going to be random every time. It's not always going to be 8. It's not a very fun website if it literally only lets you multiply 8 by 8. There's nothing interactive or new or interesting about that. So this number is always going to change. So we should make a variable for that. This number is also going to change. So we should make a variable for that. What we type in this box is going to change, right? We're not always going to type 64. Because if it says, what's 2 multiplied by 4, we would not put 64, right? So this is going to change, so we'll make a variable for the box. We'll also make a variable for the product of these two numbers, because that will change based on the numbers. So let's go ahead. First variable, we say that with var or var. num1. Easy enough, right? That'll stand for the first number in our prompt. Guess what's next? num2. After that, we'll make one for our guess. That's what I'm going to call what we put in here, our guess. Because even though I'm sure you guys are smart enough to get it right every time, It just seems like the most appropriate thing to call what we're putting in there. Num1, num2, guess. Let's also get one for the product, which is these two numbers multiplied together, num1 times num2. And finally, how about one for the response? And actually, you know what, instead of product, let's make this answer. It's a little bit more clear that we're guessing, and this is the correct answer. Also, if you're not doing multiplication, maybe you're doing division or addition or subtraction or some kind of crazy formula, it should always have an answer, right? So num1, num2, guess, answer, and response. What is response? Well, we haven't actually added it to our page yet, but a response is going to be at the bottom here. It's going to say incorrect or correct, depending on what we type and hit submit here. Okay? It's how we know, because otherwise, without a response, we can get it right and hit submit, and we don't know. We can get it wrong and hit submit, and nothing happens. So we need some kind of interactivity down here. So we have number 1, number 2, guess, answer, and response. Next, we're going to use a dollar sign. Now, you might not have used that before unless you've done jQuery in the past. It's a very jQuery unique kind of thing. Dollar sign just says the code we're about to write uses jQuery. Parentheses, and inside of here we're going to look for the document, which in this case is the HTML page. Document dot ready, parentheses. In this case, what we're saying is that when our document's ready, as in when our HTML page is finished loading, we're going to do the code inside of this parentheses right here. So in here, we're going to say new function, parentheses, close parentheses, open curly brace, and hit enter. And then after that closing parenthesis at the bottom, put a semicolon. So make sure you get this completely correct here. You can see my formatting went away. Didn't really like that, but that's okay. Let me just see. I think brackets might just be acting weird. So if your formatting went away in the style sheet, like the colors and stuff, don't worry about that. That's fine. Maybe it's still there. Anyways, so we have when our document's ready, do this new function, and we're going to write our code in between these closing things and this opening thing right here. First, we're going to set these variables to what they actually are. So the way we do that is by saying the variable name. So we'll start with num1, and we'll just say equals document dot get element by ID. Okay. Now remember, we were styling by ID before, right? We had hashtag or # input row and # math prompt. And the way that the CSS file knew what to style was that in our index sheet, our index page, we had these IDs here for math prompt and input row. And we're going to do the same thing for our JavaScript file. So num1 equals document.getElement by ID. We will name it num1 to keep it nice and simple. Now num1 doesn't actually exist yet as an ID. We need to go in our HTML page and write that right now. It's going to be where this first number is. So how about we do this? How about we make a div? We'll make a div. Div. Divs are really common. They stand for division or divider. And they're kind of like a p tag in that you can put text inside of them and give them an ID, except it doesn't actually go to the next line. So I'm going to copy this now. What is 8 multiplied by 8? And delete it. You can put it inside of these div tags. Okay? Now, you can actually put divs inside of other divs, just like we put these divs inside of a p tag. So for the first number, we'll make a div. We're going to give it an ID. An ID of num1. Okay? And let's go ahead and drop this 8 into that div tag. There we go. So we have what is div ID num1 equal to 8 multiplied by 8. All right? So we should have 2 opening tags, right? One right here and one right here, and 2 closing tags, one right here, one right here. So once you have that, let's go back to our JavaScript file now. We have num1, the variable, is now going to be kind of like a direct access point. It's going to access or give us the ability to change the part of our HTML page that is inside of this num1 div. So let's try it out. Let's say num1.innerHTML, which is the way we actually just change the content of this HTML page inside of these div tags. Equals hey. All right, put a semicolon there. And if we hit save, it didn't change. Refresh, nope. So if we right click, this is actually a good example. If we right click and we go to inspect, this is kind of the way we can do our error checking here. So we actually do have an error. We click console, cannot set property inner HTML of null. Now in programming, null means basically it doesn't exist. So it's saying it can't set the property of something that doesn't exist. Well, the problem is that we know num1 exists. So the only reason that it would think it does not exist is that we're trying to load the script, we're trying to execute our script before the body of the page is even loaded. Now typically this is not always an issue if you're working actually online, but in a development environment where we're kind of running our scripts so quickly on our desktop, it might be an issue. So really easy fix is what we're gonna do, and you can actually ignore this if you're not having an issue right now, but if you are, then I'd follow these steps. We're just gonna copy this line of code where we link our custom JavaScript on line 5. Control C, copy, delete it, and let's put it at the very end, right before our closing body tag. It seems silly, but basically we're saying we're gonna make sure that our body loads before we execute this script. So let's go back now, let's refresh, and it works now. So we have no errors. It says, what is hey? Multiplied by 8. So I'm going to exit this little inspection window, and we can continue coding. I'll get rid of this empty line. We're back in business. So, as you can see in our JavaScript, we can actually change the content of our HTML page. We actually look up an element by its ID, in this case, a div with the ID of num1, which had the HTML of 8. We're going to completely replace that. We're going to set its inner HTML equal to hey. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the next number now. num2 equals document.getElementById num2. And next we go to our HTML page here, and we'll make a div for the second number. Div, and instead of saying 8, to make sure that it's working, why don't we say something like E for error? So we should never actually see the letter E. We'll know something went wrong if we do see it. What if I refresh right now? There we go. What is hey multiplied by E? Okay, so let's change the ID now, or let's add an ID to num2. All right, now back in our JavaScript, let's test it out by saying num2.innerHTML equals hey2. Save. And it's making me refresh it for some reason. But there we go. What is hey multiplied by hey2? Now it's kind of formatting weird, so let's change that. Let's fix that by... We can replace these divs with spans, but I think if we just replace this one p tag with a span tag instead, meaning we want to span horizontally across the page, it might actually work out for us. So, and no promises here. Let's replace this p with span, and this closing p with span, and save it, and refresh. Well, I got my CSS back, but it's still formatting like that. So let's change these divs as well, and let's see if this works. Span, and span, I'll save it. There we go. So yeah, instead of divs for these two numbers, let's change it to span. That way it doesn't give us that little indentation afterwards. Span and span and refresh. There we go. What is hey multiplied by hey2? Okay, now I'm gonna exit that and try to redo it because it's making me refresh the page. Maybe it still will, but I don't really want to refresh the page every time. There we go. Now it's live updating. We are all good to go, ladies and gentlemen. What is hey multiplied by hey2? We have it in spans with IDs of num1 and num2. Let's go back to our JavaScript now. And instead of hey and hey2, we obviously don't want that. Let's set it to a random number. Now we're going to make a new function here. This whole kind of chunk of code is one function. It's what happens when we're ready, as in when the page is loaded. But we can make a new one. We just say function and we give it a name. In this case, we'll say set numbers. We do parentheses and an opening and curly, or I'm saying opening and closing curly brace. And instead of this, we can just say set numbers. So now what we're saying basically, we can see the E's are up here because we're not actually setting them to anything. We're saying when the document's ready, set a variable called num1 equal to that part of the page, same with num2, and then do this custom function set numbers, which we haven't written anything inside of yet. So inside of here, we're going to set num1 and num2 to a random number. So num1 equals, the way we do random in JavaScript is just say math with a capital M dot random, and then opening and closing parentheses. Let's save. And we actually want to set the .inner HTML there. There we go. And as you can see, the page updated. So what is 0.714555673355955 multiplied by E? It's a random number. If we refresh the page, we get a different random number every single time. So we can be sure it's pretty random, right? But we don't want to multiply this. This seems like not fun at all, right? We want a simpler number to use. So first off, we're going to do a couple things to this number here. First off, it's small. What math.random does is it gives us a random number between 0 and 1. So if we keep touching this button here, this refresh, we'll never actually get a number bigger than 1. It'll just be between 0 and 1 here. So why don't we actually multiply the result by 10. Okay. Hit save and refresh. And you can see now we have some bigger numbers here. We got 1 point something, 8 point something, 7 point something, 1 point something, so on and so forth. We don't want to deal with all this nonsense. It's too much. So we can use another math function. Make sure to put it before the first one. It's called math.floor. Okay. Put an opening parenthesis there and a closing one after the 10. It's basically saying we want to floor everything in here. And what a floor does is it really just cuts off the decimal point and everything after it. Kind of brings it back down to the biggest whole number. So you can see we have what is 3, 4, 5, looking a lot better, right? You can see we got 0 there, which we don't really want, at least I don't really want. I want to do 1 through 10, but we're getting 0 through 9. So what's an easy way to kind of just bump all these numbers up by 1? Well, at the very end here, we could just say +1. Now we'll get 1 through 10. Okay, so now easy enough, we could just do the same thing for the second number here. num2.innerHTML equals, and you can just copy paste the first line, but we'll see if I can write it before you're fast enough to even copy paste it. There we go. So now we have 2 random numbers generating. We're getting pretty close here. Finally, or I should say next, we are going to set the answer equal to, we'll just do that when we check it. That sounds like a good idea. Let's make another function called check answer or check guess. We're actually checking our guess, but check answer just seems more correct. We'll say check answer. Yeah. Okay. So when we load the page, we are setting these 2 variables, and we're setting numbers to a random number. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and set our check answer. So before we do the actual checking here, we need to make it so that when we click the submit button, it calls or uses this check answer method we're about to make. So in our ready function up here, we're going to use the $sign for jQuery, and we're going to say look at our submit button, and when we click it, we're going to do a function here, and make sure to put a semicolon right there. In fact, I don't think we need new. I think we can just say function right there as well. That should still work. Yeah, okay. So we want to do something every time we click that button there. Now to make sure it works, just to test it out, let's set the HTML of num1 first. We'll set it to clicked. So if we click this, it should say, gosh, how anticlimactic was that? Okay, it's because it's num1.innerHTML. So forgetful. Okay, now if we click it, it'll say clicked. What is clicked multiplied by 8? All right, refresh, click, was clicked. Basically what we're just testing there is to make sure that we're using the correct tag and that this JavaScript is actually finding that button and modifying the page when we actually use that button. So instead of changing the HTML here, we're just going to say check answer. So now we need to actually write our code in this check answer function down here. What we want to do is we want to set the answer equal to, let's see, what's the best way to do this? Can we do math.parse? Do they allow that? Parse int, yep. num1.innerHTML. Actually be easier if we just said var n1 equals, and we copied this right here, semicolon, and var n2 equals math.parseInt num2.innerHTML. Okay, and then answer equals n1 times n2. All right, so sorry if I just went through all that super fast. Basically what we're saying is we're making two new variables, n1 and n2, and you're like, why do we have n1 and n2 when we already have num1 and num2? Well, it's because num1 and num2 might be a little bit of a misnomer because they're not actually equal to any numbers. Instead, they're actually equal to this part of the page. The literal value of num1 and num2 is this little span area of HTML here. Whereas in this case, for n1 and n2, the actual value is a number. So if this span area here says 4, that's num1, n1 is just equal to 4. So num1 is equal to this space on the page, and n1 is equal to the number 4. Hope that makes sense. We want to work with actual numbers here. So now that we have the value of num1 and num2 stored into variables n1 and n2, we have answer equal to those two multiplied. Now keep in mind, I'm doing multiplication here. So if you're doing division, then this will just be divided, addition, plus. Makes sense. Now, why do we have var n1 and var n2, but just answer? It's because we already actually have var answer up here. So the variable named answer already exists in this page. You only put var the first time you're using a variable. Okay? So now, what we want to do is check that what we wrote in this box here is equal to this answer. Okay? All right, now that we have our answer done, we want to look at our guess now. So our guess being this box up here, and we want to make sure that whatever we put in this box is equal to the correct answer of the math problem. So we already made a variable called guess up above, but we never actually set it equal to anything in our HTML page. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say guess is equal to document.getElementById, and what did we call it in our index page? Input field. Input field. So now we can access the HTML, we can access the value of this area here. So we'll go back down and we'll check, and actually now that I look at this, we don't need these maths here. Remove that, remove math dot. Just parse int, okay? And we're gonna do an if statement. We're gonna say if guess dot value. Why does it not want me to use value? Makes me nervous, but we're gonna try it. If guess dot value, maybe it should actually be parse int guess dot value is equal to answer, then we'll say num1.innerHTML equals yes. Okay, so let's try that out now. We did a lot of changes. Hopefully it all works the first try. I'll do a wrong answer first, and nothing should happen when I hit this. Cool. 16 is the correct answer, and I hit submit, it should say yes. It did. Great. I mean, of course it did. So, we are successfully triggering the submit button and successfully looking at the data inside of here and causing a response based on that. Next, what we're going to do, and this is actually the last part of the whole shebang, the whole series here. We're going to put a response below this bar that says if we're right or not. So let's go to our index page. We have our input row, this whole row here. Let's make another paragraph. And set this ID equal to response. Yeah, there we go. And just leave it empty. We don't need to put anything in there. So response. Up here, we have a variable called response. And I think you know what we're going to do here. We're going to say response equals document.getElementById response. So now we can actually access that part of the HTML page. And hopefully this kind of workflow is becoming familiar to you guys as we do this 4 times now. We make content in the HTML page, we tag it with an ID, and then in the style sheet or the script page, we can access that part of the HTML page by its ID and either color it in the style sheet or do stuff with it, interact with it, change it in the script sheet. Okay? So we have response. Check answer. If it's correct, if guess.value is equal to answer, then let's set response.innerHTML equal to correct. And we can just say else. So if it's not correct, response.innerHTML equals incorrect. Okay? So let's go ahead and I'm going to refresh the page. 10 by 2 is 20. Correct. Down here, we should actually center that. If I put it wrong, so 19, incorrect. Great. So some people got mad at me last time for using the center tags. And as I said before, you can center things with the style sheet. So I encourage you to look up how to do that because I'm going to use the center tags in HTML. Sorry, not sorry. Response. So outside of this p tag, let's just type center, and we got to copy that and put it in between these center tags. There we go. So refresh. Now it's centered. Great. So incorrect, and if it's correct, then correct. Only 2 things left to do, and we're all done. First is we want to style this in the style sheet, which I won't spend too much time on because you guys can make it look how you want to look. But more importantly is the numbers aren't changing up here. We want to make it so that when we get it right, when we get the answer right, we get new numbers. So let's go to the let's go to the script page and put a opening brace here and a closing brace actually right before this else. And the reason we do that is because with an if statement, you need these braces if you want to do more than one thing, or you want to work on more than one line of code. So we're not only going to set it to correct, but we're also just going to call the set numbers function that we made up here. Okay, so let's try it. 10 by 7, 70. Correct. 1 by 1, 1, correct. It keeps going. If you get it wrong, then it won't go. So really this is the entire website done. You guys can of course style it however you want, but I will make sure that the styling actually works before I leave you, in case it doesn't. Response. Color. Green. There we go. Now you can also color it based on if it's correct or incorrect, as in you can make it green if it's correct and red if it's incorrect. However, that was not in the original website I showed you guys, so maybe that's for another video. Maybe I'll do some more one-off little web design tips. If you want to see that, then let me know in the comments. But for now, this is the finale. This is the completion. We're all done. Congratulations, you guys did it. You made it. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful or this series helpful, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. on Indie Programmer.